locally, you listen to that guys in the afternoon, they're so negative against, Bush, they're negative against the vouchers, they're very Democratic, and I think it's so sad.
91 degrees in Brigham City, 87 in Logan and in Preston, and 90 in Ogden. It's KVNU's For the People. Tom Grover.
Tyler Riggs.
Got on the phone line a Logan native. It's Rocky Anderson, former mayor of Salt Lake City. Rocky, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing great.
So it's an honor to have you on. Friday, you were in Washington, D.C. You were testifying on the issue of impeachment, and we wanted to invite you on to talk about that.
Well, thanks. Actually, we were testifying not just about impeachment, but generally about illegal conduct and other abuses of power by the administration and what the other remedies might also be. So it wasn't limited to impeachment. I think there was a lot of confusion about that. We were talking about all sorts of things, including how to stop the president from unilaterally attacking Iran, how to make certain that the kinds of abuses we've seen in these past several years don't occur in the future, and how we bring them to light so that the American people know what has happened. We talked, I proposed, for instance, the creation of a select committee along the model of the Church Committee or the Urban Committee, where they have a separate budget, they have separate staffs, and they delve in comprehensively regarding what it is that's happened, what kinds of abuses have taken place, and what kinds of measures Congress could take in order to deter that kind of conduct in the future.
Before we get too far, we should mention everybody, too. We've got Rocky Anderson on the phone line, and he said he's up for taking phone calls, and the numbers to join us, 753-5868, that's 753-KVNU, 752-5141, or outside of Cache Valley, 800-369-KVNU. Initially, when we were telling people we were going to have you on tonight, Rocky, a lot of people kind of scratch their head and they say, well, gee, the guy is going to be out in just a few months. How much more damage can he do, and what's the point now? He's a lame duck.
This goes way beyond George Bush, and this isn't about anger toward one person. This isn't about just a focus on Dick Cheney or George Bush. This is about what is happening to our constitutional democracy and the rule of law. Remember, the Church Committee was looking into abuses of the intelligence committees. Those abuses went clear back to Franklin Delano Roosevelt and continued on through both Republican and Democratic administrations. I don't approach any of these matters on a partisan basis, although it seems like Republican congresspeople would like to portray it that way. I think it's extremely frightening when not only the highest-ranking members of this administration are advocating what they call the unitary executive power, which means that the president doesn't need to abide by our own statutory laws or even by treaty obligations that have been ratified by Congress, negotiated by presidents, that he can just disregard those and act as a dictator, as the law unto himself. But there are 4 justices on the Supreme Court that adhere to this theory as well. We're 1 justice on the Supreme Court, and by the way, the average age of those justices is far lower than the average age of those justices that believe in the rule of law and believe that there are these kinds of constraints on the president. Our view of the separation of powers and checks and balances is always assumed. These 4 justices, all they need is 1 more, and we could see a major destructive change in terms of our constitutional democracy and the rule of law in this country, and that is not a partisan matter. That's the difference between one person holding almost unrestrained, unfettered power to do as he wishes, regardless of Congress's laws, the Constitution, or our treaty obligations, or having a government that we all have thought we've had all along, with the kinds of checks and balances that protect us against tyranny.
We got Rocky Anderson on the phone line, former mayor of Salt Lake. He was in Washington, D.C., testifying Friday about impeachment, also about the growing power of the executive branch. Questions or comments can be directed through 753 KVNU or 800-369-5868. Before we had you on, Rocky, we have a webcam chat we run during the show, and we had Rich wanted to ask you for specific crimes or specific violations that President Bush has committed.
Well, that would be a long list. Let me give you some of the major ones. The treaty obligations that we've entered into that have been ratified by the Senate are under Article 6, Section 2 of the United States Constitution, considered along with the Constitution and laws passed by Congress, the supreme law of the land. And this president simply wiped away, he thought, our obligations under the Geneva Convention, our obligations under the Convention Against Torture, the Convention on Civil and Political Rights, to which this country has obligated itself, and said, we're not going to observe the rights under those treaties for these detainees. And the Supreme Court has now said, no, the Geneva Convention actually does apply. But this president, under this executive power theory that he has, a unitary executive power, basically took the position that he doesn't need to abide by those laws. Also, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. The President of the United States looked at the people of this country and he lied to us, saying that in every instance the federal government was getting a warrant whenever we wiretap people. That turned out to be absolutely not the truth. For 2.5 years prior to the time he made those assurances, he had secretly ordered one of our security agencies, National Security Agency, to engage in wholesale warrantless wiretapping of the communications of American citizens. Telephone calls, emails. That's a very frightening thing, because FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, was passed in response to the findings of the Church Committee. When they found that the Nixon administration had engaged in unconstitutional warrantless wiretapping, they passed this law that said it would be a felony to engage in warrantless wiretapping, and now it's uncontroverted. The president has admitted that he ordered the warrantless wiretapping of American citizens' communications. In every single instance, it was a felony, and yet there's been nothing that anybody's done about it.
We've got Tyson in the webcam chat, Rocky, at KVNU4thepeople.com, and his response to what you're saying right now is that an impeachable crime. All politicians lie. So what's exceptional about that lie from President Bush versus lies from other politicians?
No. This, we heard this from people on the hearing panel the other day too. That everybody does this. Well, it's absolutely untrue that everybody has violated FISA. This is the only president since that law was put in place, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, making it a felony to engage in warrantless wiretapping. This is the only president that has blatantly violated that statute, holding himself above the law. This is the only president who has authorized the kidnapping, disappearing, and torturing of people around the world. And in fact, we know that some of the people that the CIA has picked up, kidnapped illegally, sent off to other countries to be interrogated and tortured, that at least two of them, Khalid al-Masri, a German citizen, and Maher Arar from Canada, were found to be completely innocent of any wrongdoing. And yet Maher Arar was held in a Syrian prison, tortured chamber for approximately a year. Khalid al-Masri for 5 months in an Afghanistan prison, being tortured. This country is becoming something completely foreign to the kind of country we all thought we were growing up in. A law-abiding, human rights observing country. We're becoming very much like those tyrannies from whom we've always been so proud to distinguish ourselves. The president misleading Congress and the American people into the war in Iraq. And I don't think it's really a war so much as it was an invasion and illegal occupation. And it's been disastrous for this nation. Impeachment very well lies for a president misleading Congress in these kinds of matters. And he clearly misled Congress. It wasn't just after the fact that, we found out there weren't weapons of mass destruction, but we can't really blame the president because he only had the intelligence that he had at the time. The fact is that in the October 2002 National Intelligence Estimate, the Bureau of Intelligence and Research, the intelligence agency within the State Department, and the Department of Energy said that there was nothing to this claim the president and vice president and others were making about Iraq obtaining these aluminum tubes for use of centrifuges in building their nuclear capability. They said there's nothing to that. Those centrifuges were not compatible with that sort of use. The president didn't disclose that to us when he was telling us exactly the opposite. And the State Department's intelligence agency said these claims that Saddam Hussein was trying to purchase uranium from Niger, they also said, and these were the words of the State Department Bureau of Intelligence and Research, they found that claim to be, quote, highly dubious. And yet the president was telling us in his State of the Union address that the British had found that Saddam Hussein was trying to buy uranium from Niger. The fact is, our own intelligence agency was telling us just the opposite after 9/11.
Rocky, we've got Kathy on the phone line. If you'd like to join us, 752-5141, 800-369 KVNU. Hi, Kathy. You've got Rocky Anderson.
Hey,
Hi,
Kathy.
how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. I'm doing pretty good, thank you. I have to admit that I do agree with you on certain things that, he probably did use his power to I'm not sure I understand the word, I'm not guessing the word, but he did do wiretaps and yes, all this, and the torture, and I'm sure that really did happen, but in the day and age that we are in now, there'd be a lot more people fighting against him if he didn't use the wiretaps. It's self-preservation these days.
Oh, Kathy.
And we seem to be the ones who are on the front line of terrorists at the moment, and I would like my president to use everything he could possibly use to save as many lives as possible here in the United States. And yes, we're at war, and I think you might not call it a war, and that's probably true, but if the men and women over there were given the opportunity to do their job rather than worry about everybody else, of how is Iran going to feel and how is this going to feel, I think this would have been done a long time ago.
Kathy, let me ask you, what do you consider their job to be?
I consider their job they were actually, Saddam was taken down, which is a great thing, and it saved all those people over there the mass graves that he did. It's too bad we didn't go in there sooner to save those people.
Kathy, there's so much I want to respond to what you just said. When he was actually using chemical weapons against the Kurds, engaging in a genocide, we were his greatest ally.
Okay.
After the Anfal campaign, he was promised by Robert Dole that the President of the United States would veto any legislation that complained about his use of chemical weapons. We doubled his agricultural credits. James Baker said if we were to isolate Iraq for engaging in those atrocities, then we would be isolating American interests, particularly agricultural interests. And so basically what he's saying was it was good for American business to continue doing business with Saddam Hussein even after he had engaged in those genocidal acts. So we weren't over there. We didn't go over to Iraq to save the Iraqi people. In fact, Johns Hopkins University has found that over 650,000 Iraqis have died Millions of people, a huge proportion of the population, especially professionals, have been run out of the country. Most of the doctors have left the country. Thousands of doctors have been murdered. And it's solely because of our invasion and occupation of that country. And there was no exit plan. There was no plan for what we would do after we defeated the army and got Saddam Hussein out of power. If you ask the Iraqi people, most of them, and you'll see this in the Iraq study group, the vast majority of them have said they're far worse off because of what the United States has done. And if you think that our continued occupation under the American flag in Iraq has made things safer for anybody, that's completely contrary to what the uniform view of the United States intelligence community has been since almost the beginning, because what they have said is that our continued occupation has just fueled the radicalism. It has served as a recruitment tool for Osama bin Laden, because there is so much resentment against the United States for going into a Muslim country, overthrowing the government and asserting itself and trying to call all the shots. It's a very destructive thing on all sides.
Okay, right. So what you're saying is then we shouldn't have gone in there, and
Absolutely.
we shouldn't. Okay, then.
Kathy, we got to wrap this up because we're almost hitting the top of the hour here. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks for calling, Kathy.
What I'd like to say, just in conclusion, is we should have stayed in Afghanistan, redoubled our efforts there, rather than pulling resources out to attack Iraq, a country that had nothing to do with the 9/11 attacks and which had no operational relationship with Al-Qaeda.
Now, Rocky, we got a couple minutes here, and I want to ask a couple things before we go, because a lot of the arguments you're making are strong, and anybody that's listened to this program knows that over the last 2 years, Ryan and I have been extremely critical of President Bush on issues of civil liberties. But and I've listened to a lot of what you said, Rocky, in the different rallies that you've held, and when you use phrases and verbiage such as dictatorships and comparing the U.S. to tyranny, do you feel like maybe you're appealing to a base but driving out the majority of Americans who you need to help your cause if it's going to be successful?
You know, I think we need to speak straightly in this country. And when I say that there have been war crimes, that is not hyperbole. That is not an exaggeration. The fact is that kidnapping, disappearing, and torturing people, torturing detainees in prisons that we have maintained, that constitutes a war crime under our own domestic statutory laws as well as under treaties. These treaties and laws are supposed to mean something. And we've not only violated the law, we've violated the most fundamental moral standards by which our nation has always proudly stood. And it's all been undermined by what we've seen these last few years. And it's not just a president. It's not just one or two people. It includes a Congress that has stood by very timidly and not challenged these incredible abuses of the executive power. And once again, I want to say, regardless of Iraq, regardless of these atrocities that have taken place and the human rights abuses that we now see on a daily basis, we are at a very dangerous point in terms of our constitutional democracy. Republican, Democrat, whatever you are, if you believe in the rule of law rather than the rule of one person sitting in the White House, you have got to stand up against this claim of a unitary executive power where the president can trump Congress's laws, treaties, and even our own Constitution.
All right, it's Rocky Anderson. He was testifying before Congress on Friday. Rocky, thanks for coming on KVNU tonight.
Thanks, Tom and Tyler. Take care.
Thanks, Rocky.
Take care.
Thanks, Rocky.